Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. This is the I Read Star Wars Comic Books podcast special. I'm your host, Kara Szamborski, here with Brian Murray.
Hi.
This week on episode 4, we are talking about Star Wars comic book adaptations of the films. And since there are many of those, we decided to narrow our focus to 3 of the most recent Star Wars films, specifically Rogue One, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and Star Wars The Last Jedi. Brian, initial reactions?
For the most part, I thought that these were really good adaptations.
Yeah, there were I have many specific thoughts on all of them, but I have to say, of the 3 of them, I thought The Last Jedi was the best comic book adaptation.
I had the same thought.
Yeah, it was like, I didn't feel like I necessarily had to have seen the movie first to follow what was going on. The cuts that they made from the movie made sense. The art style was unique enough where they were able to do some interesting things with it. And they had an addition of a narration on behalf of Luke and Leia that I thought worked really well in the context of a comic book. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, Brian. Let's save that one for last. Let's go chronologically and start with Star Wars Rogue One. And
a Star Wars story.
So much Star Wars. And this movie was unique because it was the first non-Skywalker saga Star Wars film that was produced. And yeah, let's get into it. So first off, I don't think that you can read Rogue One, the comic book, having not seen the movie and totally follow everything that's going on. Did you get that same vibe?
Yeah, I definitely think that you could probably follow the plot, but I don't think that you would understand it nearly as well as having the movie for context.
That said, there is a lot of bonus content in this comic book if you did see the movie and you do want more. Like, I felt like the Rogue One comic had a lot of cutscenes thrown in there. Mm-hmm. Like, there's all this extra Bodhi Rook stuff. Like, in the movie, you just know that he's the pilot and he's getting them to... He's got the information. He's the catalyst for this whole story happening. But that's kind of it. But in the comic, you get to see a little bit more of... like how he's still totally scrambled the whole time from his encounter with Borg Gullet, Saw Gerrera's little like tentacle monster truth-telling thing. Like in the movie, that's a super brief like, and now his brain's been suctioned with these tentacle things. But it seems like he's fine 2 seconds later. But in the comic, he is so not fine. He just keeps repeating, "I'm the pilot" to himself when he thinks no one's listening. And I was like, ooh, what if that had been in the movie?
Yeah, and he and K2SO have like a unique little bond like that too, where they have this conversation about how they've both been reprogrammed by the rebels.
Yeah, I thought that worked really well, and I was like, wait, I realized that this wasn't necessary for the film, but now that I've seen it in the comic book, I'm kind of wondering if it was, and we missed an opportunity here.
Yeah, definitely.
Other bonus content that I appreciated was all these extra little Mon Mothma moments where you're just like, oh, right, you're a badass. And they always just kind of have you standing there.
Yeah, definitely. And I liked how you worked in Catalyst earlier, because we did see a couple little glimpses of the Catalyst novel in here as well, with a little bit of, not quite humanizing Director Krennic, but I don't know, making it you get these little glimpses of what his life was like before Galen Erso jumped ship and ruined his whole life.
Oh, yeah, poor Krennic, except not really.
Except not really, because he does suck.
But it's been a while since I read Catalyst, and I remember reading reviews of it before I picked it up, and everyone being like, nothing really happens, but if you're a Star Wars fan and you want more Star Wars, sure, go for it. Mm-hmm. So I remember reading it, and it is really a lot of like, oh, Krennic and Galen Erso like had a functional working relationship for a really long time. So you get a sense that part of why Krennic's so mad at Galen is because he does feel a level of personal betrayal here.
Yeah, it adds an element of tragedy to his character.
So they incorporated that really well into the comic. Like, you didn't need to read Catalyst to get that there was a history there, because as Krennic is leaving what he thinks is Galen's dead body, you see him kind of flashing back to scenes of them kind of just hanging out before, which they could have done in the movie, but it would have been distracting. But in a comic, it's not as distracting because things like that are done all the time.
Yeah, and I do think that this comic's use of flashback was very effective, because we got a lot of those with Saw and Jin as well.
Oh, speaking of being a Star Wars nerd, how about that Stella reference when Saw Gerrera is like about to die? I was like, oh, the real nerds are picking this one up. Not to gatekeep, but like, odds are, if you're picking up a Star Wars comic book adaptation, you have probably seen Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Like, you already know you've saw the movie, so why would you want the adaptation unless you want to, I don't know, like, what is the appeal of an adaptation if you've already seen one version of the story? I guess it's for this bonus stuff.
Yeah, we could go all day on that. I did love that moment, though, because it makes Saw's decision to stay behind make a lot more emotional sense to me. Because in the movie, I just kind of got the impression that, I don't know, he was just giving up for some reason. But with just like him just saying her name, and we get like that one panel showing him and her together back in the Clone Wars, and it gets a much more of like a, I've done all I can and now I get to see my sister again kind of feeling. Right?
So on that same track of emotional resonance, there were not a lot of extra Chirrut and Baze in this Rogue One adaptation, but it was just enough where it made me realize that actually there are some plot holes regarding them in the film that I think the comic answered really nicely. Like, when you really think about it, there's no real reason in the film for them to keep following the rebels. But in the comic, like, Baze actually asks Chirrut, like, what are we doing? And Chirrut's like explaining that Jin is like, she's shining. And since this was like right after he asked if Cassian looked like a killer because the Force flows darkly around someone who's about to kill, you're like, oh, Chirrut might be like physically blind, but he's definitely Force sensitive and he can get, I guess, Force vibes off people. So if he's saying like Jin is shining, then that is definitely going to be enough for him to be like, yeah, whatever, we'll go with them. And then they talk about how, she's giving them a way to kind of fulfill their role as guardians of the temple, because they don't want to see the Kyber crystals used for destruction, because that would be a perversion of what they're supposed to be for. And I was like, where was this in the movie? Just one line. One line would have solved this.
Yeah, it would have been so easy to just squeeze that in. But I really loved a lot. There was a line when Baze saves Chirrut from the stormtroopers on Jeddah. He just goes, "You're welcome, Chirrut." And I'm just like, could these husbands be any cuter, please?
They're so cute. Yeah, I get emotional about their death scenes regardless of medium, because while I was reading the comic, I was just like, no, let's not do this.
Yeah, there's a little part of me that was like, maybe they'll be fine.
No, it's an adaptation, not a reimagination.
If only.
Yeah. So there were some things that I thought worked better in the movie and some things that I thought worked better in the comic. Like, I thought basically all the fight scenes worked better in the movie. I had a really hard time following them in the comic book. Some things that worked really well were, at the end of Rogue One, spoilers, at the end of Rogue One, you see Leia getting the plans and blasting off in the Tantive 4, and you know that leads immediately into A New Hope. But in the comic, they were able to reinforce that by ending the comic with the New Hope screen crawl, and I was like, yes,
that was really good.
Like, obviously, go on.
I was just gonna mention another moment with Leia in this comic. There's one panel in one of these Saw Gerrera flashbacks where we see Saw talking to Bail Organa, and like little baby Leia is just staring at Jin from across this holotable. And just like I want to see like the YA novel about these two surprising badasses.
This comic, because there was a little bit more, I guess this comic adaptation didn't work as a straight adaptation because I don't think they were trying to be a straight adaptation. I think they were trying to be like, here's Rogue One, but we're going to throw in like all these cutscenes, because there were also some more bits with, is it Admiral Raddus?
Yeah.
I always want to say Admiral Radisson, and I'm like, nope, that's a hotel chain.
Yeah, no, I'll never forget Admiral Raddus. He cost me a Star Wars bar trivia game one time.
Oh, no.
It was like the one question we didn't get was, what was his name?
But now you will never, ever forget.
Never again.
So while reading all this extra Admiral Raddus, where he's like, yeah, we're going to go fight, I was like, oh my God, the Mon Calamaris are the Hufflepuffs of the Star Wars world. It's like, you know, because like the Gryffindor, like, sorry, everyone, we're going to get Harry Potter for a second, but the Gryffindors are all just like, yeah, we're like brave and stuff, but we're going to be reckless. Whereas Hufflepuffs are more like, yeah, we're going to do the right thing, but do we necessarily have to charge in head first? And I feel like the Mon Calamaris serve this function in the Star Wars universe where they're all like, all right, so you like Rebel Command can like do their thing, but when we're sure that what we're doing is the right thing, then we're going to bring our whole fleet. Everyone's raising their hand at that table in the Great Hall. We're going. Let's do this.
Yeah,
and
if it comes to a fight, we're down to clown. But
so I really appreciated that. I'm just like, man, why have we not seen a Mon Calamari Jedi? Like, that character would fuck shit up.
There was one in the Young Jedi Knights series. I can't remember what her name was.
Bring her back. Oh man. So I read the Rogue One adaptation in trade format, and at the end of that there's a Cassian Andor K2SO special, which now I think has extra resonance now that we know they've been greenlit for a series on Disney Plus. So
I actually did not know that. I'm incredibly excited for it.
Yep. So this special was a thing I didn't know I needed, and it's how they met. And it's really
it's
cute.
so cute.
And
with K2SO trying to strangle Cassian. Like more than once.
Yeah, but that's the Star Wars meet cute.
Yeah. Attempted murder.
I appreciated that there was also an effort at Star Wars world building. Something I get frustrated with Star Wars is when they are not creative with aliens. I'm like, you could do anything with aliens, but all of them are humanoid? Like that's... But there were some... Fine, they were humanoid aliens in this, but they communicated via scent, which I thought was a very clever idea.
Yeah, that was really, really cool.
And it's like you saw Cassian's reaction to them, and he would just be like they would write the comic book sound effect sniff, and then he'd like whip around and be like, "Are you talking about me behind your back?"
Yeah, that was good. This movie reminded me how much I love Diego Luna as an actor. That
man could have chemistry with a cement brick.
I'm sure he has.
Like, I was watching it, and I think that's something that was lost in reading the comic adaptation. Is I think the real strength of Rogue One is in the acting, like across the board. But Diego Luna's like inherent chemistry with the universe is definitely a huge part of that.
Yeah, and Alan Tudyk's delivery of K2SO's lines, like
Inspired.
K2SO isn't very funny in the comic.
No,
just because like the lines themselves are not that strong, but Tudyk's delivery is just like chef kiss. It's perfect.
So good. Final thoughts on Rogue One before we move on to the new saga?
I mean, it's like you said, you know, if you've never seen Rogue One, then I mean, I'm not sure why you're listening to this podcast. That's a bit
welcome.
of a leap, but yeah, we're glad to have you. But if you have not seen it, I would recommend watching it before picking up the comic. If you have seen it, the comic is a great complement to the film.
Let's move on to The Force Awakens. First off, Luke Ross's art is so cute in this book.
Yeah.
This is a really, really cute book. It's like bubbly and friendly, which does, I think, fit the vibe of Force Awakens. Force Awakens is like, we're Star Wars, but for a new generation. Don't worry about the prequels. We don't have to talk about those.
Everything is round and soft and fun.
And I do think it's a pretty concise retelling. I think in terms of the adaptations that we read, this is the straightest interpretation, and that they don't really add anything and they don't really take anything away.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I did like them cutting out that first sequence of Poe getting the map from Lor San Tekka.
Yeah, they did. I think the first part of this story is the only bit where they really did any, let's call it compression. Like there's this single page that sums up Rey's life in, I think, a little bit more of an effective way from the movie, because the movie we're just seeing like a day in her life, but in the comic book page with 9 panels, they're able to show that this is her day every day. And oh god, what's that dude's name? The
Ankar
Plut. Yeah, what a name. And you see that he has been gradually decreasing everyone's portions, and that's their life thing. So you see that her life is pretty much the same all the time, and it's getting worse and worse. So you're just like, oh man, yeah, millennials, man, we feel that.
Which is funny because I feel like this adaptation did not fully understand the emotional beats that Rey was supposed to have.
Go on.
Well, the first one that stood out to me is in The Force Awakens, there's a point where, Finn and Rey are running through the marketplace. They get knocked down. And the first thing that Finn asks when he shakes off the dizziness is, "Are you okay?" And we get this shot of Rey processing that, and you realize that no one's ever asked if she was okay before. And in the comic, we get that from over her shoulder, so we don't see her face. And I just think that's it's not bad, but it's a missed opportunity to help establish that emotional bond with Rey. And maybe they're assuming that you've seen the movie, and so you already have that bond if you're going to have it. But I just think that would have been a good opportunity for a panel, at least.
You know that gif of from the movie Step Brothers where it's like, did we just become best friends? Yup. I feel like that's Rey and Finn.
Yeah.
It's like they escape this fight on Jakku, and then all of a sudden it's like for the entire rest of the trilogy they're just like, that person is my priority person and everyone else can go fuck off.
Yeah. And there's the other one that got me was when they find Rey on Starkiller Base. There's one where she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "We came to get you." And then Chewbacca chimes in that it was Finn's idea. And then Rey just grabs him in that hug. And it's such an emotional catharsis moment. Mm-hmm. And in the comic, the hug comes before those lines.
Oops.
And I'm just like, were you paying attention to the scene?
Actually, speaking of that, I think the creative team on this book are maybe just shippers in general, because if you noticed, both of the hugs were prominently placed on the page. There's the one between Finn and Poe and the one between Finn and Rey, and both of them were like, we're going to have a full panel beat just looking at this hug, and there's no dialogue around it because we just want you to look at these two humans embracing. And I was like, I am here for this. Thank you.
Yeah, the writer on this book is actually Chuck Wendig, who's the author of the Aftermath trilogy.
So Chuck Wendig's a super shipper.
It seems to be the case, yes.
There's this whole extra panel that I have questions about as a Poe Finn shipper, because it's so Finn has just pulled Poe's jacket from the wreckage of the TIE fighter before the TIE fighter is swallowed up by the sand. And then in the comic, there's this extra beat where there's just a panel where it looks like Finn's lying down in the desert with Poe's jacket splayed on top of him. Mm-hmm. And it was a super sensual panel, actually. And I was like, what is happening here? Is he, because he was lying down. If he was standing up, I would have been like, oh, he's like checking the size. But because he was lying down, I was like, is he napping? Is he holding on to like a shred of human contact? Like, what? I have questions about what is happening.
I think what it was supposed to be was that he had been like blown backwards because the TIE fighter kind of exploded under the sand after it sank. And so I think it was supposed to be like, he was holding the jacket and he fell down. But it definitely had a vibe of like getting your dead husband's shirt out of the drawer and smelling it.
Thank you. I'm not crazy. I see logically that you're probably right, but that's not how it was drawn.
Yeah, we recognize the console has made a decision.
Oh man, I don't normally talk about covers, but I have to talk about the cover to The Force Awakens #2 because it looks like Poe's in a rock band.
It's so good.
It's like set up like a lot of Star Wars things where it's like most characters are in the foreground kind of looking at the audience, and then there's like an overarching larger character in the background, but Poe is like mid-scream, and I think it's supposed to be when he's on like that torture chair.
Yeah.
But like it looks like he's rocking out on like a power ballad or something. So...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went back and looked at that after I saw your comment, and you're 100% correct.
Like, he's in a rock band. He's in the middle of like the most emotional part of the song, and he's giving it his all.
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing you know about Poe, it's that he does not leave anything on the sidelines.
That's true. That's true. So, things that this comic did well using the comic medium, that again, like you could do flashbacks in movies, but in movies like this it would be a distraction, whereas in the comics it's just like, here's your background art. So when they meet Han Solo and they're like, oh my god, you're Han Solo, and he goes, I used to be, and then there's like all these background art moments from the original trilogy, and you're like, oh no.
And featured prominently in there is him and Leia kissing.
Nope. Too much emotion.
Yeah, that was... I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was also a huge positive for me.
Yeah. Because, like, Harrison Ford's a great actor, so you could, like, see that he was a little, like, messed up when they were talking to him, and he was like, I used to be. And I'm like, okay, yeah, Kylo Ren gets all of his drama from his grandfather, sure.
There's also when Han Solo gets offed and he's falling down that pit, and you have like side by side panels of him falling and then Leia falling to her knees or sitting down or whatever it was. It was the way they drew the parallels between those two things in the panels is very interesting.
Oh, I loved that page. That page is a prime example of what comics can do very well as a medium. It's like showing those side-by-side moments in a way that is not distracting. The comic did... The scene where Rey touches Luke's former lightsaber and has all these like force flashes, I guess... They approached it slightly differently in the comic than they did in the film, but I thought both interpretations worked, just in slightly different ways.
Yeah, I think that the movie version is definitely easier to follow, just because things happen linearly, if that's even a word. But in the comic, maybe it's just the way the panels were arranged, that to me it sort of felt like everything was bleeding into each other, which is not a criticism. I think that's actually kind of cool. But I think it's probably more accurate to what that was. It's kind of like when people say like, oh, you can't mind read, you get like impressions from people and things like that. So I think in the movie they had to kind of go linearly, because you can't really fade in and out without people being like, this is super gimmicky and dumb. But in the comic, you get this discombobulation, so it makes more sense when Rey is like, I'm never touching that thing again, because she just had like a force trip, and it was not a good one. A Jedi sativa.
I want to get back on my Poe Finn bullshit, because there's this page where one of my favorite scenes in the movie and in this comic is when the Kylo Ren and the First Order have arrived at Maz Kanata's place to arrest everybody, and then Poe and his squad show up, and there's like this beautiful sweep of like Poe's theme with the music, and he just shoots down like 6 TIE fighters in a row, and Finn's just like, yeah, that's one hell of a pilot. And I'm like, oh, it's him. There's no reason for you to know that it's him. You thought he died, but you just know because the Force is strong with both of you.
Yeah, he can feel it in his heart.
Yeah, he's like, that's my husband. And I think that the comic showed that scene pretty well. Like, instead of having it like, here's all these individual panels where Poe Dameron is completely fucking up the First Order shit, they're just like, here's one page where Finn is just like, that's my husband. And you see like all these explosions happening, and I'm like, yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, when you're making a comic out of an action adventure film like these, you have to do a lot of compression of these scenes.
I want to talk about Kylo Ren, because I forgot how like completely rapey he is in this one.
Yeah,
like
real bad.
In both the comic and the movie, like Kylo Ren is such a creep.
Yeah,
and
his whole I can take whatever I want thing.
Ugh, gross. Don't do that. This is a message for everyone. Don't do that. That's not cool.
This is why I can't get on board with the Reylo shippers.
Oh, yeah, it's just like, man, he is super rapey. And like when he's sitting and just like with the mask on and just staring at her as she's like unconscious in the strapped down chair, I'm like, bro, no. Like, it was like vaguely Twilight, but in like a worse way, because at least like when Edward Cullen was watching Bella Swan sleep, she wasn't like tied down to a torture chair. We'll leave that for 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah,
but
he had not just kidnapped her.
But I also liked that the artist for this book made the choice to have, like, when Kylo Ren takes off his helmet, he just looks really pretty. Yeah,
Bishonen Kylo Ren.
Like, I have expected there to be sparkles and roses all over that frame. I was like, this was a choice.
You heard it here first, folks. Kylo Ren is Tuxedo Mask.
But, like, Tuxedo Mask after he's been possessed by the, like, I forget what, like, the specific name is. But, yeah. Not good Tuxedo Mask. Possessed Tuxedo Mask.
Obviously, yeah. So any final thoughts on that one?
Kylo Ren's hair is amazing in this book. The end. Like I said, it was a pretty straightforward interpretation. Let's get into a slight twist on the interpretation for The Last Jedi. So I think that when The Last Jedi came out, it seemed like people either loved it or hated it. And just let's get it out of the way right now. I fall very firmly into the I loved it camp.
Same.
And I can see why it was so polarizing, because The Last Jedi really does subvert or reject everything about the original trilogy. Like Rey and Poe and Kylo and Finn, like our main characters, are kind of acting as like recklessly and impulsively and we'll figure it out as Han, Luke, and Leia did in the original trilogy, except now those characters have grown up and learned from those mistakes. So The Last Jedi was really kind of our new generation of characters getting a crash course in why acting like that is a bad plan. So I could see why people might not have liked this movie, in that it kind of said like, hey, all those things you thought were good and cool about the original Star Wars trilogy are actually garbage, and here's why.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I loved it exactly because it was not like the other Star Wars movies.
Yeah, it was very much like it was the Star Wars movie that took the most risks from the original source material, but that's not a bad thing.
That's what I want.
Yeah. And rewatching The Last Jedi this time, I really did truly notice how many women are in prominent roles in this movie, and I'm like, yes, because watching Star Wars as a kid and only having Princess Leia, and like I got my parents got me the extra like DK like visual guides to Star Wars, and like those were everything for me because I could learn the names of other girls that were never really given names in the movies. So to watch The Last Jedi and have most of the cool shit being done by female characters, I'm just like, oh my God, thank you. Like, it's a little late, but also thank you.
Yeah, better late than never.
Yeah. So something that I also noticed on this rewatch of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi is like Rey can understand Wookiees and droids. Is that a weird thing? Because it seems like she's translating for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if that's like a latent Force thing. Like she just has like some kind of knack for languages that's amplified by her Force sensitivity.
Maybe, because like Luke could understand R2, I think, or maybe not because he had that droid translator thing in his X-wing, and I think that's how he was talking to R2. I don't think it was ever really made clear.
Yeah, I think that Luke could like get the gist of what R2 was saying, but I don't think that he was necessarily like translating sentences the way Rey does.
Yeah, like when R2 is basically having like giving Luke his like come to Jesus moment where Luke's like, I'm never going back, and R2's like, really? Because this hologram from your sister from like 30 years ago says differently.
Yeah. That was a cheap trick.
And I think Luke's just like, you watch your language or something, because R2's cursing. But you're right, maybe it's like, it could be he knows exactly what R2 is saying, or it could be that he knows what curse beep sounds like.
Yeah.
Oh man. Reading this comic and like having to really examine and think about this new trilogy made me realize the parallels between the new characters and the original characters, and I would like to share these parallels with you.
Please.
So I realized that Finn and Han are both Gryffindors who think they're Slytherins. Like, because, okay, so if you haven't read the Harry Potter series, Gryffindors and Slytherins are like kind of like two sides of the same coin. So they're always rivals because they're both like super let me hit first and ask questions later almost. But Gryffindors are always going to try to do, like, their whole thing is like bravery. Like they're going to try to do the right thing, but they'll definitely punch first. And Slytherins are very like, I am going to put all of my own interests before yours. And that is just who I am, and I'm fine with that. So I feel like both Finn and Han are both like, they're really going to do the right thing when push comes to shove, but they really, really, really want to try to be selfish. So like this movie, like The Last Jedi, Finn is just running, and even in The Force Awakens, he's just trying to get away from the First Order, and he only really comes back because I guess he like puppy dog imprinted on Rey when they first met, and now he's just like, nope, that's my priority person. But he, in The Last Jedi, his whole like thing with Rose is that she's trying to explain to him like, hey, there's stuff happening around you that's bigger than just you, but he's still like, nope, the First Order is coming, and that's terrible, and I'm going to get away with it, and there's nothing we can do. And I feel like Han Solo also was like, well, my son's as part of the dark side now, and I'm going to run away because there's nothing I can do. But he did come back, and when he did come back, he was like, we are not leaving Starkiller Base until we have helped the people who are flying around helping us. And I'm like, oh, okay, Han, I see through your bullshit. Fine. Yeah. Luke and Rey are both sand kids who just want to see new shit.
Yep.
Like, in the Last Jedi comic adaptation, you even have... So one of the things that worked really well with this comic in adding to the story is that Luke Skywalker is kind of our de facto narrator through it. So you do get to see more of his internal monologue when he's thinking about Rey. And he's like, we are very similar. We're both from desert planets and we both want to get out and see the world. And I'm just like, oh, sand babies.
Yeah. He's even like, until one day you stumble upon a droid carrying secret data vital to the survival of the rebellion.
And I was like, look at that. Look at that parallel. And then Poe Dameron and Princess Leia are obviously the same because they both have zero patience and zero fucks. Like, Leia might have matured a little bit and be a little, like, calmer about the decisions that she makes, but ultimately she's just like, oh, you disrupted the chain of command and did a stupid thing and took over this ship while I was unconscious. Stun.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, all right.
That's such a great moment. I mean, I kind of wish that Holdo had gotten to stun him, but you can only have one person stunning a guy.
And Leia was definitely just like, I woke up for this. Like, I do not have the time for this nonsense.
I loved Holdo's characterization in the adaptation, because there's a point where when she's first meeting Poe in the movie, I can't remember what her line was, but I remember it being like vaguely snarky and sarcastic. Whereas in the comic, she's like, oh yeah, no, you're Poe Dameron. I know who you are. I need you to sit your ass down and do what I tell you.
Yeah, she's like, you need to go away now. I'm like, oh, thanks.
Yeah. I also like the adaptation gave Leia a dick joke towards the beginning. Where when the First Order dreadnought pulls in, she's like, always with the big ships. Sometimes I have to ask myself what they're compensating for. I'm just like,
I love it. The Last Jedi comic adaptation was mostly narrated by Luke, but there was a moment where Leia got some narration in when she does her like force floating thing. Back to the ship, which is a moment in the movie that I absolutely loved. And people are like, does the Force work like that? And I'm like, fuck yeah, sure it does.
Yeah.
Who
knows?
But right? But you don't really... I was like, she wasn't done yet. And so in the comic, she explicitly goes like, I'm not done yet. I was like, thank you. That's the vibe that I got, but it's nice to kind of see it written out for everyone to see. Like, she is not done, therefore the Force will help guide her back to life. And I will never tire of that entire scene. And so something that struck me about The Last Jedi, which again is like, it kind of throws out previous Star Wars stuff, is the whole like, running out of fuel is an acknowledged problem that drives a lot of the plot.
Yeah.
In this, and I think this is the first time that logistics have explicitly been mentioned as a thing, which like, yeah, like wars are won or lost by logistics at the end of the day. But in Star Wars, it's more like, well, we're using lasers, so we don't have to worry about stuff like that. But it's like, ooh, but you actually do.
Yeah, like, you're traveling through hyperspace. There's got to be a cost to that. And I like this movie for establishing that.
Mm-hmm. Even
as the new trilogy plays fast and loose with hyperspace travel and how long stuff takes.
Yep.
That's a whole nother tangent, though.
So many tangents. Like, so many of the notes that I wrote after reading this book are tangents because I just have a lot of emotions about The Last Jedi. Like, and some of it's from, again, like reading a lot of are we calling it like expanded universe, or is that like for the books and the comics and everything, or everything's canon now, right?
Yeah. I feel like there's like the expanded universe, which is anything not movies, and then Legends, which is like the old canon.
Right. So in Leia, Princess of Alderaan, I think the book is called, you see how Leia and Holdo actually like knew each other when they were teenagers in like the Junior Senators program or something. And Admiral Hald and Haldo, not Admiral at that point, but Haldo is basically like this hippie child who's like, I remember her being like a gymnast or something, and she's just like a, it's kind of spacey and like new agey Aquariusness, and so kind of like knowing that about her, and then seeing like what a snarky hard ass she is in both the movie and the comic version, I'm just like, oh, how far you've come.
Yeah, you've really grown up, haven't you?
There's a moment in The Last Jedi about Rey that like really got to me this time, because I don't think I noticed it before, but they call your attention. So in comic books, you have so few pages to work with generally that every panel has to count. Mm-hmm. So reading these adaptations was interesting to me because they have to be even more succinct than the movies. So every time the creators do have a panel, like have a story beat included, like that was a conscious choice that was not going on the cutting room floor, like even more so than in the films. So there's this moment that was in both the movie and the comic as like a separate beat where Rey is like reaching her hand out to feel the water falling off the side of the Millennium Falcon when it's raining out, and she's smiling. And this time when I was watching it, it hit me that water falling from the sky is not a thing that is normal for her, because she's a sand kid from a desert planet and water is life. And I was just like, oh, you're seeing the galaxy. Look at you.
Yeah, it's a good echo of the line from the Force Awakens where she says that she's never seen so much green in the whole galaxy, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, now you're surrounded by it, honey. It's fine.
Yeah, we just want Rey to be okay.
We just want Rey to be okay. Do we want Kylo Ren to be okay too, or are we ambivalent about that at this point?
I mean, I think that Kylo Ren can take a short walk or a long walk up a short cliff.
He's like I said, really watching Force Awakens, I'm like, man, this dude's such a creep, and I'm kind of still feeling that in The Last Jedi when he has those like moments with Rey where they're like in the same place, they're like force bonded because Supreme Leader Snoke is doing it to like manipulate them or whatever that was, and like when Rey's like, you're a monster, Kylo's like, yeah, I am. And I was like, oh, you're like into that. That's like doing it for you, that she's calling you a monster right now. I don't know how I feel about this.
When she asks him to please put a shirt on and he refuses.
Yep.
Doesn't even acknowledge it.
Oh my God. He's like the master negger. He's like, no one cares about you. You're from nothing. Your parents didn't love you. Only I care about you. I was like, ooh. See that right there? That right there is like on the checklist of, are you in an abusive relationship? That right there. Let me isolate you from everyone else because only I care about you. That is like top 5 list of signs you're in an abusive relationship. Don't do it, Rey.
Yeah, and his enthusiasm for taking over the role of Supreme Leader really kind of cemented me into the like, I'm not sure how this kid comes back camp. Like, because we got Vader redeemed, but only because he was dying. Like,
but also he had just, like, Vader had just killed Palpatine, and like, sure, he had been doing his whole like, Luke, we will rule the galaxy together as father and son, but he did like throw the Emperor down the shaft, and then you're right, he died, but he was just like, tell your sister you were right. And I was like, ooh, if he had lived, would he have rejected the whole like leadership thing? We just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
But you're right. Kylo Ren just did his whole song and dance about how we have to burn the past to the ground, but he then immediately stepped into an existing power structure to reinforce that existing power structure.
Yeah, and I just want to take a moment to touch on one of my favorite moments from the movie of Hux, like, seeing Kylo on the ground, seeing Snoke cut in half, and, like, going to take out his blaster, and then Kylo Ren gets up and just puts the blaster back. The movie had so many good comedic beats that they didn't put into the comic which I think is ultimately a good thing, because I don't think they would have worked nearly as well. Like the whole general hugs thing from the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Well, like I said, that's what I'm saying with the adaptation. Like, you have even less time to work with than you do for the movie. So it's like they cut everything superfluous, and the comedic beats are hilarious, but like you said, might not necessarily translate to a comic, as we saw with the Rogue One adaptation. K2SO's lines fell flat because they didn't have the delivery. Mm-hmm. So
there was one line that I loved that they added, which is when Finn and Rose and Poe are talking about their plan to take over, destroy the Imperial tracking system or whatever. When Poe asks Rose about something, she's like, yeah, it's almost like it was my idea or something. Because she does totally get steamrolled in that conversation in the movie, and seeing this line pointed out, like, yeah, she was kind of the engineer behind this thing. Like, yeah, give her some damn credit.
It's almost like I wonder if the people who were adapting this as a comic, like, got the script, said, there are some problems with this, let's fix them, and then did that.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's true, because I can't remember what they were specifically right now, but I noticed moments like that in the other adaptations as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's stuff like, even in this Last Jedi interpretation, like, giving you an idea of what's going through Leia's head when she's force floating back, telling you a little bit more of Luke's story, like why he decided to cut himself off, why that was a really hard thing for him to do. Just like getting a little bit more of his perspective, which again, I don't think would have worked in the film, but reading it as a comic works really well. So if you like Luke as a character, reading this adaptation, basically, like, he's your narrator for this story, and which does work because the movie creator said multiple times that, you know, The Force Awakens was like Han's story coming to a resolution, and Last Jedi is Luke's story coming to a resolution. So having Luke be the explicit narrator of this comic just kind of doubles down on that.
And really lets us look forward to the rise of Skywalker being the culmination of Chewbacca's story.
I don't know how they're going to do that, since Carrie Fisher died before they could do any filming for that. I'm just like, like, they're just like, oh, we're saving the best for last. We're saving Carrie Fisher for last. And then she died. And I was like, oh, okay. So I keep wondering, like, what did they have to change? Because, you know, they had to change that script.
Oh, yeah.
Because she died. So now I'm just like, ooh, how will this movie be different than what it would have been? And will they do a comic adaptation that shows what it could have been if she was still alive? That's my question.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. That hadn't occurred to me.
Right? Because, I mean, they did the Star Wars, the original script that Lucas had, and they turned that into a comic. So now I'm just like, oh, but that script that you originally had when you thought you were going to have Carrie Fisher, what would that look like? We can do that as a comic. Right? Like, they said they wouldn't CGI her into the movie and just would use footage that they hadn't used from Force Awakens. But, yeah, doesn't count using people's visage in, like, comic books and stuff. Could we do a comic version? Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting question. I'd like to see what they do.
Like, they won't do it, but I'm just like, ooh, but you could do that.
Maybe we'll get that in, like, 15 years or something.
Oh, God. Oh, man. So, again, talking about things in this comic adaptation that, again, they have so little time to work with, so the beats that they chose, you know, are the really meaningful ones. Mm-hmm. And there's some moments that fuck me up in the movie and also in this comic. Luke looking to the horizon with the twin suns right before he dies. That's not cool.
Yeah.
That made me cry. That continues to make me cry. And then the end of the movie with that kid in the stables holding his broom like a lightsaber. And I I think that the comic adaptation made like a clearer case for why that end scene is relevant. Because like Luke does this whole like again through his narration you get to see a little bit more of his perspective, and so when he's telling Rey like I'm not the guy you think I am, he in the comic adaptation he gets a little bit more explicit about how he's like, oh man, I wish I never told people my story because now I'm like this legend, but I'm not that legend, I'm just a guy. And she's like, well, yeah, but maybe we need a legend right now. So at the end of The Last Jedi, the movie, when Leia's like, we have all that we need right here to continue the resistance, and then they cut to the kid in the stables listening to the story of Luke Skywalker and then looking to the stars and holding his broom like a lightsaber. I think that's what Leia was talking about. She's talking about using the power of storytelling to get people to see that there is hope and they can fight back and one person can make a difference. So the comic really made that line, that through line clear that, yeah, maybe the galaxy does need a legend right now. And so Luke going out to face Kylo Ren in his like astral projected form was him being like, you want a legend? I'll give you a goddamn legend.
Yeah, for sure. So good. The brushing the dust off his shoulder moment.
Iconic.
My theater cheered when I saw that. I remember that from the first time I saw it.
Like, I think I waited my whole life for that moment of film and I didn't know it.
Or the moment of Holdo's cruiser blowing through Snoke's flagship.
Ooh.
Which got the full panel spread it deserved, or the full page spread.
Yeah, not even panel, full page, because that was, I mean, the sound cut out, and I just remember like a shock going through my body because I was like, oh my god, they went there.
And then hearing about people who thought that the sound in their theater had broken or something.
It's like, nope, artistic license, friends, artistic license. I have to say, overall, the art style in this Last Jedi adaptation was my favorite of the three that we read for this show today.
Yeah, I agree.
It was like very, like all the characters' faces were like more on the side of caricature than straight interpretation. And there was a lot of like cross-hatching that made it feel like kind of a vintage French bande dessinée. I just couldn't shake the feeling that this comic was super heavily inspired art style wise by French comics more so than American ones.
Yeah, I haven't read a lot of French comics, so I have to take your word on that. But
yeah, I mean, it's like when you think American comics, you tend to think superhero comics, and then there is a certain like styles can differ, but there's generally a similar superhero aesthetic. And you can kind of like place the decade by how the style looks, but it kind of is like more like clean lines, or like when you get into the 80s through present day, like all these like weird muscles and stuff like that. But since the French style is not as, it's basically non-existent superhero wise. So all the stories tend to be more genre oriented historically, like action adventure or westerns or historical pieces or slice of life pieces. And there are a lot of French comics that I've seen that do have this more like a cross-hatched blocky style. And so that it really felt like this comic was coming more from that tradition than from American style superhero comics. And I thought it worked because the kind of French style that I'm thinking of is kind of 60s, 70s comic style. And since Star Wars is a franchise that was born in the 70s, that made sense to me artistically.
I like pictures.
But yeah, like the whole time I was reading this Last Jedi adaptation, I was just like, man, this art is so good.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't notice it specifically, which is for me a good sign, because I normally only notice art if I don't like it. So.
Oh, well, then it's a good thing you didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is my final thought for The Last Jedi adaptation. It is my favorite one of the adaptations that we read, and I am obsessed with the art style.
And I'm obsessed with the movie.
Such a good movie. And it's just revisiting these films just made me extra excited for Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, bring it on. I'm ready. Let's do this.
So hyped. Yeah.
All right, everyone. That is our show for today. Thank you for joining us for our adventures through the Star Wars film adaptations. And please join us next time for I Read Star Wars Comic Books Episode 5, where we will talk about the Age of Rebellion.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the I Read Star Wars Comics podcast presented by I Read Comic Books, the podcast. This show was first aired on the IRCB Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Special thanks to all you wonderful supporters out there. Send us feedback about this show at ircbpodcast@gmail.com and check out our website, ircbpodcast.com, for our Discord, zines, and all things IRCB.
You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at IRCB Podcast. This show is produced by Brian Murray and Kara Szamborski, edited by Zander Riggs, and executive produced by Mike Rapin. Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.